I'm Stephen Smith, and welcome to the Kitman Labs Game Changer podcast. I'm really excited about today's episode because over the last number of episodes, if you've listened, whilst we've been talking about completely different topics and concepts, one particular aspect shone through, and that is communication and collaboration. It's rooted in everything and within the realm of high performance. I think whether we're talking about student athlete care, whether we're talking about student athlete experience, whether we're talking about innovation or progress, and we have three partners that I think have excelled in this area in Matt Robinson, the athletic trainer at Texas Tech, Eric Rash, the director of applied performance at Baylor University, and Jason Avedisian, the director of sports science for Olympic sports. So welcome, guys. Excited about today's conversation.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Oh, delighted to have you all here, and knowing what it is that you guys do at each of your organizations and the role that you play, and the fact that it's slightly different for each one of you, I think could be a really interesting conversation. But would love to hear in your own words, and I'll put this one to the floor to kind of kick things off. But when you guys think about communication and collaboration, what do you think of in terms of, the groups of people that you're interacting with and that, form that backbone for your communication and collaboration? And, why is it such a hot topic, and potentially even like within each of those different domains? I'm sure the reality of what that actually means and how you unpack the importance of communication and collaboration is different across the different types of stakeholders that you deal with. And would really just love to understand what that looks like from each of your vantage points, given that your roles is different.
I can kick that off. I think the collaboration and communication piece is tremendously critical, right? With all the changes that we experience on a day-to-day basis, from where I sit in my position, being able to have a pulse on what is going on in each one of the different departments, maybe some challenges that they're experiencing, and some obstacles that they're being presented with. Are there solutions that different areas have found that can be transferred over to that area? And I think, being able to have good relationships with everybody in these different domains really helps us arrive at quicker solutions in the end.
And Eric, as you're talking about it, can you talk to the differences between what that looks like when you're dealing with sports medicine versus what it looks like when you're dealing with coaching versus even what it looks like when you're dealing with the athletes themselves?
Yeah, I think coaches, if we're talking about maybe performance coaches or even sport coaches for that matter, they're more focused on outcomes and what is the end result of the process, whereas in the athletic medicine space, it's maybe more process oriented, and the conversation centered around those two different aspects. You have it in the performance side as well, but those would be some big differences, and just being able to understand kind of the different nuances of each situation and attack it from that angle.
Matt, maybe you can talk about it from your perspective in terms of given that we were finishing on sports medicine there, as an athletic trainer, what are the key aspects for you in terms of how you use data to either, push information on other people and help to, guide the decisions that you want? But where does it become valuable for you in terms of the information that you need from others to be able to help you in your specific role as well?
Yeah, I think one of the major things for us is really the backbone on the medical side is availability, having people ready, being able to look at injury statistics and trends, and being able to then sit back with our sports performance teams, with our dietitians, with our sports psychologists, and be able to use that communal input. All of our teams here operate on a performance team model where we have, group chats running, we have meetings taking place, and using all of those things to then, be taking the data we're collecting on the performance side and be able to use that to help, drive different decisions, to then be intervening with technical staff in our realm of soccer with my responsibility specifically, but then be able to then help others within the medical side of it. Like, we may be seeing something in the soccer realm that might help the football realm on the medical side, or we might be seeing something in what we're using to monitor within our soccer environment, whether it's force play, strength testing, subjective wellness that might be of use with another program, like our track team or somebody else, and trying to just connect those people and use those paths of communication to, help break down those walls of like, oh, this is a siloed department, like this is only performance taking this on. Well, can medicine and performance collaborate? Can psych intervene if it's sleep issues? Can nutrition intervene if it's fueling concerns of things of that nature? Can our physicians intervene if there's something that's even deeper down? So really that, data is becoming more and more king on the medical side because it's already there on the performance side. So how can we continue to infiltrate more and more of our teams to build that performance model and that high performance team to better manage our programs?
And what does that look like from the athlete's perspective? Like, how involved are you guys getting in terms of sharing that information back with the athletes, sitting down, having open dialogue with them, helping them to understand their journey, whether it's for things like injury prevention or even things like return to play and rehab? Like, how close are you bringing them into that kind of environment?
I think the biggest thing on the easy landscape of it from a prevention aspect, like that's all of our baseline assessments, and I'll assess during as well for like our firm strength testing. But then we're looking at too, like trying to provide input on a, spring for us in soccer is our development time. Like we're developing now, we're getting prepped for summer. So like those conversations are happening right now with our performance team, between myself, our sports scientist, and our sports performance coach, of like helping these kids understand like where might be their weak points, where were the things that they succeeded at to get from point A to point B this spring, and what's going to help them prepare and where to focus on over the summer. So in essence, like keeping it a little bit more broad for those topics, but like one of like a long-term ACL I'm dealing with, she might know like, she's at X, Y, and Z point throughout her process, and she hit these milestones already, and that's why she's getting to where she's going and why she's able to then open up to the next thing. So some of those cases will get a little bit closer into the data, or the kids that have like big time changes, a kid that goes from their max of the fall now becoming their average of the spring, and now they've got a new max that's even further on if we're just talking in like terms of jump height on TMJ, or even just changes to wellness and stuff like that, like better trends from season to now out of season, like better able to manage sleep or stress or all of those things. So there's a throttling of it and not necessarily letting in all the way through, but also knowing when to use the data for certain things, because the same thing's happening right now with our performance team of having meetings as our technical staff is meeting with players on exits to get ready for summer. Well, how much of that performance data needs to come into those meetings? The coaches are realizing, yes, we have all this data, but we also might need to contextualize and explain the why that, this person might have a top speed of this at this position. Well, had to use them as a utility, and they might have had a better opportunity to go in and get a higher speed, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're more or less athletic than the other person. So like those wheels are all rolling within everyone that operates in our realm of soccer specifically.
Yeah, I think that context-specific nature is incredibly important. Jason, what does that look like from your perspective then, given like working across all Olympic sports and scientific angle and bringing that into everybody and trying to sow that seed into all of the different stakeholders? Like, what does that look like for you? And can you talk to us about the value of communication and collaboration and the role it plays in your day-to-day?
So the role here is a little unique in that our sports science group services up to 15 Olympic teams. So there's, schedules are pretty hectic. It's just, training and practice and competition and travel schedules. So I think the big things for us is just really figuring out what do each team's value in terms of, whether it's GPS data or it's in weight room training data or it's, competition type of data, like what are going to be the most valuable pieces of information for each of those teams. And then within that, each of the support staffs within those teams, whether it be performance coaches, sports medicine, and then how can we go about communicating that information in a way that's clear, concise, and effective. So, and then going into like the student athlete perspective, we tend to give most of our feedback, I would say, during training. in terms of like trying to drive like a training intent, whether it be, we're doing force plate jumps, we'll provide them some like immediate feedback, or then we'll say, here's your previous high, here's how you did today. And then, so that's usually like in season, and then out of season is when we'll probably do more of like reviews with athletes and with just teams in general in terms of, season to season trends or preseason to postseason trends. But it is going to vary pretty drastically team to team. And, the reality is some teams and some, sport coaches, sports medicine folks are going to be more data curious than others. So we know we have some like natural wins there with certain teams, but then other teams, you're still kind of, picking and choosing when to communicate, information, data. So, but yeah, a big thing for us is just, and I think we'll talk more about this as the episode goes forward. But for us, it's big to be like just standardized and having scalability with our data and communication across a lot of different teams.
Yeah, it makes total sense. I think especially when you're dealing with so many different stakeholders, trying to have some level of standardization to aid you and give you a structure that you can go to with everybody. We obviously, it's no secret that within the NCAA over the last year, it's been a turbulent environment. There's been a lot of change, whether that's changes from, the moving around of members within conferences, or whether it's like some of the advances that we're seeing around the likelihood for, the players to become employees, or things through NIL, or the changes of player portal. Like, how is that affecting you on a day-to-day basis, and how is it affecting communication and collaboration?
I can get started with that. I think the most important aspect on our end from a sports science standpoint is just being adaptable with knowing that rosters could change pretty dramatically season to season, especially in certain sports where the portal is really heavy, and based off of that, potentially philosophical changes could occur potentially within like the coaching staff based on the current roster they have, because as we all know, teams are going to change season to season. Style of a player are going to be a little bit different, and KPIs and other related metrics may change based off of like the altering of like the roster. And there may be just different emphasis depending on who's going to be there. And the reality is you may not know who's going to all be there, a couple of weeks even leading up before a season, just because, players are coming in and out. So for us, it's being adaptable, but also to having some underlying, I think, systems and principles, and where like how we can communicate that information is fairly standardized, but then delivering exactly like what type of information is going to be best suited for a particular team, and the changes that occur, I think, are important.
Yeah, I'll piggyback off that. I think, as you have an influx of new players into your program on a regular basis, right? The sport of football, you've got new players coming in at the semester break, new players coming in at the summer, new players showing up, right before the season starts sometimes. So being able to assess them, I love what Jason's saying and the standardization of things, being able to assess them and then compare that to, larger team normative data, just so you know what you're getting yourself into with a particular athlete who maybe you have not seen or hasn't ever trained with you beforehand. So I think, being able to, you're not necessarily going to prevent things per se, but know what you have coming down the pipe is a big deal in future decision making. So I think that's really been something that we've tried to lean into more with all the recent change.
Given that there is so much change happening, especially around like players moving, et cetera, or the likelihood even for players to move, right? It's not always that just like you're going to be receiving an influx of players. It feels like there's the potential for a pressure and a stress around retention of players. Matt, maybe you can talk the medical perspective. Has it changed anything in terms of the dynamic of either the standard of care or the education of the athletes on their journey, their healthcare journey? Like, how important now, or is it more important now or less important than it was before? And does retention play a part in like the importance of communication and collaboration now because of things like the portal?
Yeah, I think inherently it's changed a lot in the past couple of years alone. And I think the biggest thing is I think these guys can probably attest to it too. It's educating and getting the buy-in of the student athlete themselves to understand why they're doing what they're doing, and teaching them that these processes that you're making them go through are what's going to help them, especially all of our kids that want to go to that next level. That's one of the biggest follow-up points that I have with a lot of my kids that have ended up getting drafted or going to the next level. It's just like the tools that we were able to provide them streamlined their effect once they got in to now fighting for their contract, right? So that's what they're now telling everyone that's going through that as they're building up through our program, right? So we're trying to get that to be the normative conversation of like, even coaches and recruiting, like our medical staff, our performance team, our nutrition, our psychology is going to help prepare you. And if you bought in on that from day one when you committed here or when you decided to transfer here, like these are going to be the people that are going to help you get to that next level, because this is the standard of care that we're providing. These are all of the people that are going to be here to help you, that are all operating and speaking that same language, that are going to help push that. And inherently also difficult then when you're getting in, grad transfers or somebody that's got a 5th year or 6th year because of medicals, or 7th year, whatever it may be, like trying to quickly identify where you can have the greatest impact on that kid early on in their journey of that, health, and, making them as durable and as ready to compete as possible. Everyone operates their departments differently at every school. And so one thing that might be a focus for you might not have been focused elsewhere. And that's an area where we can help that kid. In the soccer realm, we get July and then August preseason hits. So like we have to have our girls ready to rock and roll when they touch down with coaches August 1, and we're right into competition. And then if it's a 5th year or grad transfer, like that kid's gone. So like we don't have this, stereotypical long-term athlete development model that we can, impart over 4 or 5 years. Like we have to identify the issues right away. And that's honestly a lot of the root of conversations that's happening within our sports medicine department right now, is like with all these transfers, with all of these younger kids coming in now and graduating early, like how can we best care for them right away so that there isn't an issue week 1 of preseason or week 1 of summer workouts, whatever it may be.
Yeah, it certainly feels like there's a heightened importance to having clarity in communication and more, I think, more purposeful and intentful collaboration for very specific reasons or rationale. But because of this, with that in mind, would love to hear from each of you guys in terms of what's the single most important component within your environment for successful communication and collaboration? What is the bedrock of that for you? And I know that that's a tough question, but I think it would be great just to hear different perspectives around, for us, this is the one thing for communication collaboration. This is the one thing, or that really drives it for us. This is what it's about within our organization, and to help others understand, okay, how should they think about shaping this for them?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to sound like a cow. I don't know if it's one thing, but I would say trust and transparency. Everybody wants the truth, and they want it in a way that is going to have an impact on what they should do next and how they should move forward. So I think if those two elements are present in any conversation, it could be a tough conversation, but if everybody kind of has an equal understanding that, it's for the benefit of the larger group, then I think you can have a lot of positive outcomes from that.
I would say, obviously those are great points that Eric mentioned. They're super important, but I would say one of the important aspects for communication and collaboration is having a shared language. So you'll have medical, think of, return to running maybe a little differently than performance, maybe a little differently than sports science. I think getting everyone on the same page and having similar heuristics, similar terminology, educating, staffs on, these are our KPIs and why we value these. I think the terminology piece of data is really important. And I think when you have everyone on the same page in terms of the language they're using, I think it just drives everyone in the same direction. So I'd go back to just a common language.
I would probably go to what Jason said, that common language, I think, is a big sticking point for where we've started to get a lot of success, like, you know, with having just brought in, we're, you know, further on in the equipment labs from our medical standpoint, but all of us now speaking the same language of looking at the same things, you know, our director of sports med wanting to look more at everyone being on the same page with the language of, you know, what we all are aspiring to get to or look at. And then, you know, pushing that into our sports performance and everything, everyone on the same page of we're all trying to get to this point. So probably language, and then, you know, obviously common goal of just all being on the same page to achieve that goal, which is obviously, you know, the best experience and holistic care that we can provide to our student athletes.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it sounds like all of you guys are saying the same thing, and that I think that concept of like that system or process to develop that common language, like everybody having a shared understanding of where you're going, what you're trying to achieve, what you're doing with it, how you're going to leverage the data. So I actually love the angle that all of you guys have come at this, because I think it points back to the same thing. We often hear people talking about the importance of communication, and, you know, we've heard, I think, years ago, there was probably a push towards, we need a communication system. We need to be messaging each other. You know, we need a way to communicate with the other coaches and to message them or to message our athletes, etc. And I think more recently, we're hearing people say, yeah, okay, great. That's secondary. But actually what we really need is we need everybody here rowing the boat in the same direction. We need everybody here on the same page. We need everybody to understand, why do we care about these particular data points? And in fact, I think we're seeing a push towards some people even saying to us, we don't want the communications messaging piece anymore. We want to force people back to have these conversations together about these types of data points to drive these actions. Like, we want a Knights of the Round Table approach. We don't want this virtual assistant. We want to leverage the technology to help us have better discussions together and understand each other better. And we just love a perspective on that, and how you guys agree or disagree with that kind of mindset.
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in. Let's go ahead, Matt.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I agree with you 100%. Like the model that we've always had, we got away from it a little bit during COVID and post, and have really pivoted back towards it, is the in-person meetings, our care team meetings, our critical care team meetings, our performance team meetings. And then there's a bunch of one-offs that happen in conjunction with that too. So I think, yeah, there's not really a good alternative for an in-person, face-to-face conversation. And that's the best way that I was brought up in this space, is to solve problems. You address them, with that individual, or if you have a shared goal, you're trying to achieve something, you have to be in the same room working through the same problem at the same time. So no, I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, I totally agree on that. I mean, been collecting subjective wellness and stuff like that, but my office is right where the player entrance is at our facility for soccer. So like, one of my big things is try to have a touch point with every single one of those kids when they walk in the door. Like, how are you this morning? Like, all of us greet each other when they come into the athletic training room in the morning, or, when we step into our indoor for activation before we start our warm-ups. Like, myself, our sports scientist, our performance coach, my athletic training students, our managers, like it's top down, coaching staff, everybody. It's a how are you interacting face to face. We used to have rules like no cell phones in the athletic training room. Well, like, stopped implementing that because nobody just brought them in, because we would just talk, like everyone's checking in with each other, seeing how everyone's doing. And like, you almost in essence create this top down of like, everyone's doing it now. So even the girls are picking up on if somebody's not responding to them the same way, they're kind of getting that intuition, like, oh, maybe I should check in on my friend here and see how they're doing. But even breaking off and like getting out of the office, like, I always looked at it as like, oh, the girls are in weights. Like, I'm going to go catch up on stuff at my desk and paperwork. Well, there's so much more to be had of being in the weight room and being around during those sessions. And like, we've got 3 sets of eyes on them at all times, like checking in with how things feel from a medical standpoint, or do we need to talk through something X, Y, and Z? But, it's even becoming more and more of like, shared spaces. Like how many of us in the Division I setting have different medical facilities, different weight rooms, different, spots that, Jason, you're probably at multiple different practices a day and you're bouncing around X, Y, and Z, but those touch points of being around with the other staff members, walking over to baseball, walking over to football, like checking in on each other and checking in on one another, because we are in that face-to-face world again. And it doesn't all have to be in the staff group me or the virtual meetings that we have for staff meetings. To be able to check in on people, like just being face-to-face has made such a dramatic change in that.
Yeah, and I think I'll take it in sort of another direction in terms of like communicating information and data. Like, all of our reports get automated through like a Catapult open field or a, Hawken dynamic report or like an AMS, and, we create visualizations and analysis, but, you can send that off, but without having that face-to-face group collaboration, like you don't really get to explain or like contextualize that sort of information, or just even bouncing back ideas back and forth in terms of like, what you're seeing with a particular team from a particular, data set. I read a quote, I don't remember, it was a paper I was reading fairly recently, but it said basically, it was along the lines of like the data itself is soulless, right? Like it's not really providing any sort of meaning or importance. It's the practitioners and the people that are, working with the data and collecting the data that provide like the context and, the rationale as to why it looks a certain way or doesn't look what we expect. So yeah, I think the person to person, especially from a sports science perspective, because I think sometimes that profession gets a little bit of a bad rap in terms of just like, they send the report off and you check your box there. But I think there has to be a lot of soft skills there in terms of communicating the why, or for, trying to break down like some complex information to a practitioner who may not be as like well versed in GPS or force plates or biomechanical tools and whatnot. So I think, the person-to-person aspect of that is really crucial there.
Yeah, it goes back to being able to create that common language, right? It happens through that. It doesn't happen digitally. That happens by sitting down and building understanding and building consensus and having discussions, right? All of your institutions have invested in a common platform to create a centralized, interconnected data landscape and to manage your operational processes. Can you talk about the role that that's played in kind of fostering communication and collaboration? I would love to hear specific use cases or examples as to, these are the core things that this is what it's driving for us, and this is how it's really changed or improved or elevated your ability to communicate and collaborate.
Yeah, I can start with this. It goes back for us, just like scalability across 16 different teams, having a common athlete management system, EMR platform, just provides us the ability to scale out. There's certain teams that will use common technologies, and being able to create visualizations, being able to create dashboards that have certain scalabilities across different teams is really valuable, because at the end of the day, within our platform, you're having different sport coaches within each team, you're having different medical personnel within each team, all be able to access this platform in one central location. So that becomes really valuable. But what's also become valuable for us is just the historical information. So a quick example for us is in the 2021 season for men's soccer, as we were just getting started on the platform, we actually had to go outside the platform to look at 2015 data, when the last time our men's soccer team had been to the College Cup. But fast forward to 2023, when our men's soccer team was making another run to the NCAA championship, I was able to easily access our 2021 data that was sitting in the Kitman Labs platform, and be able to show just how our coaches broke down the practice plan in the week between the Elite Eight and then the Final Four and the national championship game. So just a way for us to easily communicate information, look at historic information, from season to season. And you could do that with, a lot of teams now that are on the platform. We have historic information because, that's just a big priority for us, is having a central location to historically collect data, communicate that information. So for us, it just comes down to scalability.
Yeah, I would second everything Jason said. I think the scalability of it, the historical, access to historical data. We've been on the platform, I think, roughly the same time or the same length of time that Clemson has, and we can do similar things. Whether it's looking back through football GPS data or women's basketball polar data, just to see kind of where the spikes were, maybe where the lulls were. We ran into some issues, things like that. The dashboarding, reporting, to be able to have the same expectation across all sports out of one platform has really been nice. So because our athletic trainers are talking with each other so often, we don't necessarily have an issue where data is being represented in a different way that confuses one person versus the other. So that's been going back to kind of the shared language idea that we've been talking about. I think it's present through means like that. But yeah, the scalability and just how we can deliver the same level of service across all sports has really been huge for us.
From our standpoint, one of the biggest add-ons, we were able to transition a lot of our pre-existing data when we made the transition into Kitman. So we have a lot of that historical data, and it's just creating dashboards and pulling that up to be able to look at season to season change. But, we can easily build out now our, injury trends semester by semester that we can, reflect back on and be able to look at, what were injury trends. One of the big things that I like to look at is the squad analysis and being able to look at turnarounds and injuries by turnaround and look at, how long specific things took. Being able to have a double check and be able to manage and check like progression of minutes for return to plays and having that housed within Kitman Labs and being able to, just recreate stuff and pass along. Like that's one of the big things that, we're taking on is like what we can use in one sport that we can duplicate in and others can start using that and breaking down that barrier of, being familiar with the data and wanting to look deeper and find things. It just provides an easy landscape to duplicate it across all sports and just have our, liaisons with Kitman too that can help us create things that we might be, theorizing, but not know what is possible quite yet. That's a big thing with our sports psychology and our nutrition programs right now is how can we better utilize all of the things that we have at our disposal and be able to streamline the efforts that they're putting forth to better collect data and be more data informed.
Yeah, I think one of the things I loved about all of your responses is that the use cases are so wide and so varied, right? There's so many different elements, so many different conversations, so many different use cases, so many different stakeholders that are kind of leaning in and getting involved. One of the thoughts that occurred to me as you guys were even saying that was that sounds like that can become really complex really fast as well. So like, how do you then look at what it is that you're doing and ensure that, the insights that are being delivered are communicated in a way that to coaches and to athletes that don't overwhelm them and, don't shove a pile of complexity down their throat and really help you to deliver the message? Like, what are the things that you guys do? How important is that? How much time do you spend thinking about that?
Yeah, I think it comes back to, really determining your KPIs within a certain team, within a certain data set, and then just driving the communication through those. Like, you do a counter movement jump on a force plate, you can get 70 to 80 different metrics, and obviously you're not communicating all those with a team or with an athlete. But there may be one particular metric based on like the phase of training that we're in that we're really interested in. So we're just going to communicate, peak propulsive power here, and here was your max last time. Here's where your max was this time, and then that's what we're going with. Or if we're doing a speed session, on the field, like we're communicating like your max velocity achieved on a 30-meter force velocity profile run. It's just trying to understand like what's going to be the most relevant metrics within a team given, a certain phase of the season or a certain outcome that we're trying to elicit, and then just going from there. Because as we all know, we deal with a lot of data and a lot of different technologies that can give you hundreds of metrics usually across these different technologies. And it's just figuring out usually good rule of thumb for us is like the 3 to 5 most important metrics that can hopefully explain, successes and failures within the sport. But it's constantly vetting that process too, and refining your KPIs and refining the ones that, you really want to have the take-home message for the staffs and for the athletes. So I think that's largely what we do from a vetting standpoint of that community.
Yeah, I think I'm going to stop going after Jason. He's got such great answers. But again, what he said still rings true with us. I think having a shared understanding of what you're trying to look at in the first place, then once that's been settled, how do you best represent it? That's where, just personally, I've really leaned, shout out Brian and Abby on the customer support side. They've done a tremendous job helping me come up with new and unique ways to convey the information to the support staff, the performance coaches and others like that isn't overburdening, right? It's simple visualizations, whether it's a line chart, a bar chart, things like that aren't going to get, somebody super bogged down or in the weeds. And the way that the system can there's some different ways to maybe sneak in an extra metric here or there that might provide more context. They've been great in helping streamline those processes and build those different charts and dashboards out. But along with that, it's upskilling the practitioners. It's a continual education process where we're trying to, go deeper, learn more, understand things at a higher level so that they can then turn around. The performance coaches can then turn around and put it in a context that sport coaches and athletes understand, where it's maybe related to their sport, using the same vernacular, the same nomenclature. So we've seen a lot of positive benefit from that.
I think everybody's talked about sport coaches and let's say even the athletes themselves and what that looks like cross medicine, what it looks like cross psychology, nutrition. We haven't mentioned administration, but would love to know how what's the role there and what does that look like and how does something like this become integral to that as well?
I think one of the things that we dove into a little bit also with the help of Brian and Abby was in talking with our insurance coordinator and our director of sports med is how can we take all of this that we're collecting via diagnostics and treatments and the injury statistics and all of that stuff, and how can we dump this into a dashboard to get a holistic view of what was that year like, right? From an injury standpoint, concussions, surgeries, MRIs, all of that stuff. And then you're looking at, the cost associated with all those things. Everyone's in a constant state of reviewing finances and things of that nature. So what are our big ticket areas? Are we needing to cut down? Is injuries becoming a burden on us for surgeries and MRIs and CTs and x-rays? Or is it a better year because we were able to have more of an impact, because more conversations are being had? Athlete buy-in is at an all-time high. Everyone's looking for that next thing that we can dive into. I think from administratively speaking, that's one of their biggest things. The other thing is the touch points, right? In talking with our new director of sports psychology, they're really trying to press their impact on our student athletes, well-being alone, right? How do we quantify that? Because so much of it is subjective and it is in-person conversations, but they're doing a ton of work and it's being utilized. So how do we show that? Same thing with sports nutrition. They're out there working as hard as they can equally to try and push those things. So how do we best intake that data and be able to show administration these are the people in the trenches that are really doing all of these things? And we're cutting down on injuries, winning championships, X, Y, and Z, but we're also utilizing all of this support staff to help build us up.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, absolutely. I was just going to say it's been an area that I think we see way more focus more recently. We're seeing a lot of people place a lot of emphasis on quantifying the amount of impact that they're having, being able to say this is the number of treatments, this is the number of coaching sessions, this is the number of rehab sessions, this is the amount of time that we're getting, this is the number of one-on-ones, this is the number of group sessions, and just being really able to showcase the output through some of the high performance teams, through some of the medical teams, it's immense. and being able to then walk in and say, hey, this is what we're doing. This is the value that we're creating. These are the changes that we saw this year. These are the improvements. Here's the areas that we're having challenges. This is where we need support from you. This is where we need to invest our dollars moving forward. Like it's one of the most fascinating use cases from my perspective to be able to dive in and see what's going on in some of your organizations, to see the conversations that are being facilitated and then how impactful they are. Because if we can help the administration understand this is the value we're getting from this, but here's the areas that we're having challenges, like now we can really start to move the needle. Now we can really start diving in the areas that are causing problems. So we've talked about quite a lot. Would love to understand from all of your perspectives again, like what's the one piece of advice that you give to somebody that's listening into this, that's thinking about trying to promote this type of approach, trying to really bring data to the fore through communication and collaboration?
I would say biggest piece of advice from that perspective is documentation of your systems and principles and your shared language. One of the things that was really helpful for us was creating basically like a sports science playbook that had all of our technology, what the metrics actually mean, soft definitions of them so that other practitioners could understand. Workflows of different technologies. Hey, here's how you set up a force plate. Here's how you upload a catapult session. So just having that documentation of how we collect, analyze, store data and information, how it's communicated, I think could be really valuable, because anyone within the organization, whether it's a performance coach or sports medicine or sports scientist, or even administration, could just understand how you go about day-to-day processes with certain teams and certain technologies. So I would say just having a really refined process in how you document everything that you do from a data standpoint has been helpful.
Yeah, so full transparency, Jason and I met after we came on board, and we've adopted a lot of his ideas with the sports science playbook, and couldn't agree more. It's come in huge when we're trying to onboard new staff, maybe at a really awkward time of the year. And again, Abby and Brian have been great from that standpoint, but there's no way they can cover everything in the amount of time that they have available. So we've done some things internally that have really got people up to speed really quickly, and that's been a huge benefit, I think, to add on to just being open and flexible with how the system may change, new features coming in, and how one use case may need to change over time. It has really, really been something that we've experienced firsthand, and has really been beneficial to us, just being open-minded and flexible as maybe things change within the system or within our environment in general. So
I think from our standpoint in trying to bring this on early on, it was trying to figure out where we were going to put our cookies in the basket. Like, what were our big things that we really needed to make sure we were doing really well before we started to dive into the nitty gritty. Like, make sure that we have those processes put into place of like everyone's doing things the same way, especially from our standpoint of everything being heavy on the documentation and, keeping track of exposures and, making sure our calendar is set because of practices and sports performance and all that stuff, and making sure that it's uniform so that everyone is speaking that language, that when somebody else is being brought in, we can all help on that. And then with the nitty gritty stuff, having people, like, it's one of the things that I do is sit down with our new staff and go through things, and we will offer to like them to work with, Abby or Brian on a one-on-one, especially if we have more than one person, we may do a group kind of training session. But also having like 2-3 people that are that kind of like project team of like bringing people in and all speaking that same language of understanding, this is how we utilize Kitman. This is how we, document. This is how we track our diagnostics and our exposures and all that stuff. So everyone understands like, okay, this is the way I need to do it. If I have questions, I go to this person about this or that or the other.
Yeah, it makes total sense. I think that having a plan sounds like the most important thing is having that plan, right? I think each of you have gone about that in a slightly different way, whether it is the creation of that, like, you know, playbook, run book of, hey, here's what everything means, here's how we're looking at it, or whether it's, hey, what's the most important aspects for us as we get up and running here? What are the things that we're focusing on? I think that being grounded in that plan seems like it's incredibly important. And I love the idea of the run book or playbook too, because it's something that as we continue to learn and grow, we continue to adapt and get better, and becomes the Bible, right? It becomes an area where everyone, when they're walking in, they know exactly where to start. They know how what's changed. They know how things have adapted and evolved, and just a really smart way of, I think, creating that common language that we've talked about. And I think that's, if anybody takes one thing home from this, I think, you know, when it comes to communication and collaboration, like that transparency, that clarity, you know, that doesn't happen by accident. It's an incredible conversation. I'd certainly love to do it again, and looking forward to potentially having a conversation like this in person with each one of you guys. But really appreciate you all being involved. You certainly, all three of you guys are game changers within your own environments and across the landscape of NCAA. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Yeah, Stephen, thanks for having us.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Stephen. Appreciate it.